Class. Okay, Professor Tootle, you've got to be your most inspired self today. How's that for pressure?
Okay. I mean, I don't know if that I have to.
Oh,
I
that's true. And I'm actually jesting. I think you're going to give some knowledge, even if your questioner, me, isn't articulate today. I'm not stressed. Actually, I do have this Eagles kind of peaceful, easy feeling. I know that sounds really odd with all that's going on with the Trump administration, and I do think most of it is madness. Much of it at least, is madness. And I have some deep concerns about our constitutional order. So why then do I have a peaceful, easy feeling? And the way I've decided to resolve that conflict, that cognitive dissonance in my brain, uh, well, I'll just tell you why. I have a trust in the American people. I mean, we're going to screw up a lot, but eventually we're going to go, no, we want freedom. That's what kind of it means to be an American, and we don't want to be told what to do. And somebody's telling us what to do, and we don't like that anymore. And at some point, we'll behave appropriately, and it will change. The, anyway, that's kind of my political theory. But I have another theory: is that words don't mean anything anymore, or if they do, they mean the opposite. And I don't even mean an Orwellian kind of 1984 thing. I just don't think we've accepted that words don't mean anything in America, or we're accepting the trial case where you just throw a bunch of stuff on the wall and see what sticks, and we're kind of comfortable or realize, oh, politics is nasty, and sure that happens, and don't worry about it. It's all negotiation. It's a joke, Professor. I mean, and it's confusing to me because that's I didn't think the world worked that way, but apparently it has for the last decade. And so somehow I'd like to have you resolve this. And where I went with, this is like I've given you 8 of the 70 or 80 words on this sheet of paper so far, Professor. Look at this. See, look at this.
all
7 or
right.
8. What I actually did was read the here. See if this sounds familiar to you. A word fitly spoken is like an apple of gold in a frame of silver. Now you've mentioned that 5 times over, at least 5 times over our 100. This is our 115th show. And by the way, is it a show or is it a podcast or is it a conversation? We've never branded it. So are we making a strategic error when you can just say somebody who came over the border who has some tattoos is a terrorist? Well, that's our current nomenclature. That's how we work in society now, by labeling something or naming it, and then everybody rallies around that name or label. And you and I are doing the opposite. We have all these nuances, and we just have conversation, and there's shades of gray and a little bit of historical drama. You go, well, yeah, that makes sense, but in context, that's wrong. You have to go back to Lincoln and why he said that, because it was in reaction to a letter from somebody who resigned from Congress who was in the Confederacy, and using that same quote from the Bible. It's Proverbs 25:11. And Lincoln turned it around and said, no, you're misunderstanding the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. This is what it means to be an American. Professor, I don't think many citizens today are having this kind of tone setting of what we should be talking about. And I'd like you to get us on that tone where if anybody picks us up on the internet, they can go, Professor Tootle said something that I think I should do more research or think in a different way. So now the show is yours for a little bit. Out of all that crap I've thrown on you, and I still have about 90 words that I haven't brought up yet, those are the things that I'd like you to at least start to give some reflection on.
Well, I think the first thing that you're detecting, and it is true, is that the distrust of our institutions is often linked to the use of clever words to hide a true meaning. And you mentioned the Apple of Gold documents. I sometimes go back to the Model of Christian Charity by John Winthrop, if you really want to go back old school. And one of the things that John Winthrop warns against is dissembling with our God. And I've always liked the word dissembling better than lie, because it means, or at least it has this shade of meaning that means more like trying to beat God on a technicality. I mean, this is what your teenage kids do. When you're saying, "Oh, I told you to go to bed when the basketball game ended. And you're like, well, technically the commentators are still talking about the game. So I was like, listen, stop trying to beat me on a technicality. You know what I meant. So, and it's this kind of like what has been going on for a little over 100 years now is that, and I like many things, we can blame Woodrow Wilson. If you go back and look at Woodrow Wilson's horrible books, almost all of them, the title of them was like the opposite of what a normal person would have, so he would have
Give an example.
derived as the meaning. So he had a book called Constitutional Government that was about how to destroy the Constitution using the government. Like you would think it's a book about how awesome the Constitution is, but it was really a book about destroying the Constitution. And he did that so many times, and it led to this kind of broader legal tradition. And I'm sure there's a good version of it. And Bart, we might need to bring Bart in here earlier, because the good version of living constitutionalism is that, of course, cultures evolve and language evolves, and we need to be aware of how language and culture evolves. That I would say that's probably the good version of living constitution. But the cynical version of living constitutionalism is, I want to get this thing done, and I'm just going to reinvent new definitions of words so that I get to do what I want. And for, 120 years, people have been, actually it goes back further than that, because almost from the beginning, when it comes to matters dealing with slavery, and race and the destruction of aristocratic institutions in America, politicians will often dissemble. From the moment the Constitution was ratified, you had Northerners reading it as saying, see, look, the slavery is not in the Constitution. And Southerners reading the same document saying, see, look, slavery is protected under the Constitution.
Well, but Professor, let me interrupt you on that specific point, because that came to mind when I was writing down my notes. Isn't it a fact, historically, that ambiguity was very intentionally put into the Constitution in order to even form our government? That if it didn't have that ambiguity, we wouldn't have been able to have 13 colonies, and we'd still be under the reign of the king. Yay or
no? No, because people who were alive at the time remembered things throughout their lifetimes. So there are some things that seem so obvious that you don't need to write them down. And there's a book about this called No Property in Man, that when the founders were actually writing the Constitution, it came up, the issue of slavery came up, of course, and Madison started to use the word slavery in the Constitution, and somebody stopped him and said, whoa, hey, don't use the word slavery, because if we use the word slavery, some future generation might see the word there and think that we thought human beings could be property. And how horrible this would be if some future generation thought that the founders of this country thought that human beings could be property.
Well, so Professor, I get that
but what I mean is everybody at the time knew that.
Well, but they also, many, I don't think all, but many of them held slaves at the same time they were writing all men are created equal.
Right, but they believed that they were creating the institution that was going to destroy that idea.
But that wasn't universally regarded by definition by all the southern states who signed on to it, who believed in slavery as a right.
I think it was. I mean, there might have been some, I mean, I guess you could say there were probably some people who were worried about how it would end. But at the time of ratification, it was pretty universally acknowledged that the United States government was going to end slavery. And
including in the southern states.
yeah, that it was going to go away somehow. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the Cornerstone Address. I mean, if you look at the Cornerstone Address, I wish Jake was here. He could be linking
He'll
this
be
stuff.
on in 15 minutes.
Yeah, but in the Cornerstone Address, Andrew Stevens even says that. He says, I'm sure we all remember even 20 years ago, most of our politicians, we're talking about the founding, and we all understood we all understand that the United States of America was founded hostile to the idea of racism and slavery. And we would like to start a new government based on racism and slavery because.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Now I'm following you. Yeah.
Yeah. So Southerners understood that at the time, Southern representatives understood at the time that the founding ideals were incompatible with the idea of holding human beings in bondage. They just didn't know exactly how to go about making it happen when it seemed like the way that slavery was ending, because this is true, the way that slavery was ending was that states were voting to get rid of slavery. And so what you wanted to preserve was the state's right to end slavery. But by preserving the state's right to end slavery, you were also saying that legally that slavery was a state institution.
So let me lead to a conclusion that is probably inaccurate, because I want you to take me through this logically. As I started the show, I have this mess of ideas that I'm trying to figure out in my head. It seems to me that in current politics, and whether it's the TikTok ban or whether it's birthright citizenship, or whether it's taking American citizens and shipping them over to some horrible prison overseas, what? I mean, some of that is so obscene to me that I can't even fathom it. Where many of my friends though go, well, yeah, but that's just joking. It's just negotiating. It's just posturing in order to move us in a way, because it's a reaction to the last 100 years of the left, or Democrats or liberals.
Yeah.
And so we're just pushing. We have to be jerks. We have to be mean spirited because the other side is so mean spirited. And I'm kind of sitting on the outside now, because it used to be my tribe, the Republican Party, but it's not. And I'm kind of looking like a pox on both your houses. I don't get it. So will you take something historical that we're talking about and put it in today's terms on the importance of words and meanings and labels and how we could be better citizens?
Well, what's missing is good faith. When the Trump administration is essentially using this kind of shotgun approach to just do a bunch of stuff and really not caring if any of it is legal or not, and just hoping that some of what they're doing will stand up, in the idea that like the American people don't actually care what's legal or not. They just want stuff done to be done.
Okay, now wait. Now say that again. Was that a hypothetical or rhetorical, or you actually mean that, or they just say that the American people don't care if it's legal or not?
Well, the American people have been, I think, and I have to be careful because I don't know if this is actually true, but this is what it seems like culturally, that somehow or other our political institutions are getting the signal from the American people that they don't actually care about preserving institutions of government, that they just care about getting stuff done.
Which is the opposite of how our entire system is organized.
Right. In other words, if you have taught people for 50-ish years that government is supposed to do something, the government, the job of the government is to turn desires into action, which is a perfectly legitimate reading and of the founding, and so in some sense there were founders who believed that, but the lack of a conservative party, the lack of having somebody out there saying no, the purpose of government is to secure rights, is what's missing. Essentially, we've got two Democratic parties now.
Okay, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So it's not a cognitive dissonance. It's just the
There's
world is.
nobody making the argument that there's nobody, everybody's just a Jeffersonian now. Everybody's a Jacksonian now. Like
There's no Hamiltons
we have
around.
a Democratic Party going up against the Democratic Party in terms of like their philosophy of governance, which says you're supposed to be majoritarian and and the people are not just sovereign, but you can that where you put your thumb on the scale is in majoritarianism. And it's not a balance between majoritarianism and securing minority rights.
You have given in the past 5 different organizations that are the remaining constitutional principles. I think the Free Press is one. Teach for America.
Teaching American History, the Ashbrook Center, Bill of Rights Institute, the Federalist Society really seems to care about this stuff.
Is it not the Dispatch? It's the other one.
The Dispatch is great. They just acquired SCOTUS blog too, so the world of the Dispatch is.
So there still are some minor bit players, Jonah Goldberg's of the world and David French's of the world.
Sure.
But there's you're saying the Republican Party really is in dead except in name only. Do you really mean that?
Well, I just don't know of any politicians outside of David Valadao
and some past ones.
Yeah. I mean, certainly people in the past, but right now there are no Republican or Democratic politicians who are.
I'm skipping a lot of what I want to talk about, and maybe intentionally to get to some Q&A earlier than I normally do. Do you still consider yourself a conservative?
Maybe this is what we should have been talking about all along. Like, I don't know if using these words is useful anymore because I don't know what they mean to other people anymore.
Yeah. So you're a conservative, but it probably gives the wrong meaning to a bunch of other people.
Yeah. So I used to say that, if I can use the term, conservative, but like what I mean by that is that I would like to preserve all of the ideals and institutions of the founding. And
all men are created equal.
Yeah.
And that's the apple.
Well, yeah. And there's a great document put out and I use it in class all the time, put out by the Bill of Rights Institute. And it's meant to be a handout for junior high and high school students. But it's the one that's right here, actually. It's the one that's in.
You've opened that up before. Yeah.
I've held it up before. And
you really need some better food in your pantry.
I know. Well, it's almost the weekend. That's only got to last us for 3 days. But this handout from the Bill of Rights Institute is when I say that I'm a conservative, this is what I mean. This is what I'm for. This is what I mean. I would like to preserve natural inalienable rights, liberty, equality, justice, majority rule, minority rights, consent to the governed, democracy, a republic, rule of law, due process, separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism, freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and private property. Right? So those are the things that I would like to keep.
Sounds good. You're a conservative. You want to conserve those.
Right. Exactly. But when people say, when I say I'm a conservative and they're like, oh, well, that must mean you're a white supremacist. And I'm like, no, that's not on my list.
Thank you. Or you're a social.
Yeah. Or whatever, I mean, I am a Christian and I am also, you could say, a nationalist. But, when you say Christian nationalist, that, oh my God. Yeah. But what do I mean by a nationalist? I mean a national government based on this stuff.
The 10th Amendment, did you read that out on that?
But I mean, again, this is a handout meant for junior high,
okay.
Right? Like these are the basics, I'm
just going to the basics that if it's not specifically in there, it's reserved to the states or to the people. And it seems like that's a bedrock principle of what we should conserve.
Well, the idea that we are founded upon a natural rights foundation. So the bottom level of this, I read it from bottom to top, but the the bottom foundational element is that we are built on a natural rights foundation, and then the next level up is consent and Republican government, then limited government, then constitutional auxiliary precautions, and the Bill of Rights. We need to get Tony on here to pimp the Bill of Rights Institute. That's who put this out.
Oh, yeah. I will call Tony.
Yeah,
Or
we're
do you
gonna
want
get
to do
Tony
that
Williams
first?
on here, and he can tell you all about the Bill of Rights Institute and the
All right,
good
let's
work.
have him out as a guest
Yeah.
interviewer. So, Professor, we talked some about. This is my last question or two. Fascist, terrorist, racist. I don't know, Trumpist. I mean, there's a lot of ists out there. And it seems like most of them are kind of inaccurate, or at least they're like mean-spirited marketing or something on both sides. It seems like they're like, you just want to label somebody something, and then you don't have to think much anymore because you can just start to hear their conversation. You just label them as something, a misogynist, and then you don't have to worry about what they say anymore. Am I reading that right, or has it always been that way? I mean, it was pretty nasty in the founding of our country too, but
Yeah, both. You're reading it right, and it has always been that way.
okay, fair enough. All right, so, but I shouldn't have a heightened sense of awareness. It just is what it is. Humans like labeling things, and mostly wrong.
Well, we have to label things. That's how our brains work. I
Okay.
mean, the only thing that we have to work with is a human brain. I mean, that's all we got. And the human brain, memory to us is a story. And in order to, so that means that labels or names are shortcut ways of telling yourself a story about
Okay.
different people. So when you want people to not do that, you're asking them to do something that's impossible.
You just think that we should define our terms better. Like instead of left and
Yeah.
right, we should know what left and right means, and it doesn't mean what most people say it means.
Yeah, and another person we probably need to have on, I just texted him actually, is Hiram Lewis from the Myth of Left and Right. We were texting about motorcycles the other day, but our favorite motorcycle podcast just came out, so I just texted him about that. But in addition, he is a world-class scholar, and we have a slight disagreement on this, so it would be good to have him on the show so we can kind of hash this out. But I'll try to present his argument that the part of it, one of the parts of it that I like is that, except for I hate the term that he uses. He says we need to go granular. That's the term he uses. That our political conversations would be more productive if we get past the label and describe the concept, and then we can make more political progress. And that's something that Hiram and I agree on.
What do you disagree on then? What's wrong with granular?
Number one, I don't like I just don't like new terms.
Granular is an old term.
One of my friends, another historian, he's a historian of Latvia, and he posted on Facebook the use of the word delve, like to delve deeper. And
sure.
He was showing how people now use that term and how much he hates it. Like I part of me is a slight cultural conservative in that I think that that we often invent some new big word or catchphrase when what we really need to do is just go back and find the smallest, clearest word possible. Because, well, for this precise reason that it's much more useful to use a clear, small, old word rather than to, coin some new phrase that is going to, I don't know, sound fancy. Like I always want, I mean, Lincoln did this, and this is following the other, actually, hold on, visual aid here. This is the writing guide that I use in my classes. Here are many editions of it. The Pocket Guide to Writing in History by Mary Lynn Rampolla. But one of the things that we do in history that I've always loved is that we always try to use the simplest, clearest, most precise word possible because we want to be understood. We're not trying to confuse you. We want you to understand what we're saying. So it drives me nuts, and it's something that happens in the social sciences. You get famous by inventing a new word, and so historians, real old-fashioned historians kind of bristle at that. We
Well,
don't
so
like
let me give you one last example, and then we'll open it up to questions. This is one I guess I'm triggered by, and I'm not actually. I'm triggered like all of us are occasionally in something. You challenge my swearing to the oath to the Constitution. I'm triggered by that. Those are fighting words for me. So I get being triggered. But when the I guess it's liberals that came out with Latinx, I just wondered whether they talked to any folks from Latin America and whether they want that word to be described to them. And we have found out since that they don't. As a super majority, they don't like that word. So who created that word in order to do what in society? I
Yeah,
don't
well,
get.
that's a good example of what we mean. It's some academic in order to, you know, push a particular political agenda, invents a new word and says this is how we want this word described, and you ban certain words and you invent new ones in order to push a particular political agenda. I wish I had an example of this, but I know that the AP does this a lot.
Well, the
That
Gulf of Mexico and the Gulf of America. I mean,
well, yeah, but not just that. I mean, but through the AP style book, columnists have been complaining about this for years. If you have a syndicated column, every newspaper uses the AP style book, and there are certain terms that the AP just banned their use and said you must substitute this word for this word. And it's a way of controlling how people think.
okay, well, Professor, the current pros at controlling the way people think, overreach is not even the right word about it, but the Trump administration's delved down into DEI and into the private sector, in universities and law firms and media, specific media, and individuals who used to be in the administration. It really is kind of unprecedented, isn't it? Do we want the federal government to have that much power, not only internally and striking their own websites and their own SOPs within government, but they're going externally and saying, you must do what the AP is saying. You must say this or don't say these things. Isn't that currently going on right in front of our eyes?
Yeah, and it's one of the problems with handing over so much power to the government is that when you hand over this much power to the government, there is a chance that, I mean, every party now acts like they're going to win every election from now on, and they kind of forget that that once they open this Pandora's box, once they invent this new power, it can be used against you. And what we're seeing in many cases is stuff that was invented by the Biden or Obama administrations that the Trump administration is just saying, okay, well, we're just like you. We're going to use these powers and we're going to just shove it right back down your throat.
All right, last question. How do we unravel this? Because in my mind, all the law firms, all the new employees in the last 3 months of the federal government, if they don't win office again in 2 years and 4 years, especially 4 years, well, they'll all be replaced because they'll be suspect. And it will this back and forth yin yang. To me, that's really not healthy for our society to not trust the other half of society. Mm-hmm. So the current labels, we just label somebody woke, or we label them rhino, or whatever all the things that we put on people, and then we get rid of the other team back and forth. That just doesn't seem. What is a conservative? How does a conservative react to that?
Well, the thing is that the conservative is not a reactionary. That's the most. I mean, at a fundamental level, I always felt like this was something that Coolidge understood. That a reactionary is the opposite of a conservative. And Eisenhower, there was a guy in the mid 1950s who wrote a book called What We Are For, and his name was Arthur Larson. And Eisenhower sort of held up the book and said, "This is what a conservative is, right? You have to say what we're for." And it isn't going to be based on what they're saying. We need to define ourselves and say what we're for. And I did see the Atlantic published this article about this new concept that people are really excited about called pluralism. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, this is pluralism, right? And if liberals are running around saying, hey, there's this great new idea called pluralism, I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was invented by the founding fathers. What are you talking about? New idea. I mean, I think that was literally the title of the article. But it's fine. I'm glad they've come around, to join us in the 1750s.
Okay.
But
Professor, I know we haven't gotten to what you wanted to go to, but let's go to what you wanted to go to in a little bit. Let's open it up to Q&A. I always like to welcome newcomers with a question or a comment if they'd like. Allison, you're up, and then Jeff, if you have any. You're not obligated to ask questions or comments, but this is your opportunity to get first bite at the apple. Allison or Jeff?
I have so many questions, and I can't even start.
Welcome to my brain, Allison.
Yeah. No, this is fascinating. Yeah, this is my first time in one of these, and even though my camera's not working, I was nodding along, and
If you do have a question or a comment, feel free to jump back in a little bit then.
okay, yep, will do.
Excellent, thanks. Jeff, how about you?
Not my first time, but I'm sure enjoying these. I wrote down lots of things. I don't know that I have a question, but kind of on your original purpose, it has occurred to me that we as a society have lost the desire not to be embarrassed when you're proven to be wrong. And it seems to me that everything we're hearing now from the administration, from politicians generally, amounts essentially to gaslighting. It doesn't even matter if what you're saying is true. It only matters if people believe you.
Jeff, let me ask a follow-up question, though. This is politically incorrect. I know it's politically correct, so just try to forgive me, you all, and listeners in the future. I guess it's a question for Professor Tootle on top of Jeff's question. The reason Trump is like that, and he's demanded that everybody in his environment is like that, is because of Al Franken. Now, should Al Franken have done what he did before he was a U.S. Senator by joking around with a woman on a plane? No, of course he shouldn't. Should he have not been a U.S. Senator because of that? At the time, I'd say no, don't resign over that kind of thing. Everybody saw that any transgression in your life, you should automatically head your head in shame and resign and be miserable for the rest of your life. And the majority of the American people said, BS, everybody's done something stupid or immature or horrible. And it's wokeness, and we got to stop it. That's the reason we're in this situation, in my point. So now, Professor, you can answer Jeff or me or both.
Yeah, I'm the one nodding along because actually, Jeff, you brought up something that I was thinking about this week. In the shower, as we all have shower thoughts, right? And I was trying to get at what's the political incentive here? And I was thinking that every politician, the first thing they want is to get reelected. Begin with that as the premise. And then the incentive of most politicians is like the incentive of most college administrators, that they would like to get reelected in the shortest way possible, in the easiest way possible. And many politicians have recognized the reality that there is no point in making a good faith argument. I want that to hang there for a second. And if there's no point at all in making a good faith argument, that all that's going to do is complicate your life and make your reelection less likely, because somebody is going to come in from your own party and call you a squish or a rhino, or you're not down with the cause, or you're not part of the resistance or whatever, because you're only going to face a challenge from either from a radical. That's where your danger, where your reelection danger comes from. You just engage in gaslighting, and then it will seem like a superpower to have no shame, because nobody gives you any credit. No voter in the primaries, at least, gives you credit for being a person of character who's capable of shame.
Bro, okay, I got to interrupt, Professor. Didn't they? I'm not that old. Yeah, I guess I'm getting old, but they taught this in the Boy Scouts. They taught this in my Episcopal church. I don't think they directly, yeah, I think they kind of directly taught it with the old school principal in elementary school. I mean, it was like, and your family, I mean, and your neighbors. I mean, this was so shame or say a sorry or kindness. I mean, I guess that's old fashioned stuff, but that's not old. It's not in the history books old fashioned. I'm still alive. So
You know,
what the heck
but
changed?
it doesn't work. It doesn't
the
work
Boy
as
Scouts
well.
are gone. The church is gone. The history books are gone, right? All of those institutions that were character shaping institutions, like Yuval Levin has made this point for 20 years, that nobody joins an institution with the idea of having their character shaped anymore. People join institutions because they would like to project an identity, and that's it.
Or to get into college, yeah, you buy that
Yeah,
identity.
or credentialism in order to pretend to have a certain belief system.
Really, I am old fashioned then. I'm a dinosaur, huh?
Yeah, I mean, go look at again. I wish Jake was here, but look at the rate of participation among mainstream Protestant churches over the last 50 years. And I hear people say this all the time. People who are in their 40s or 50s, they say, "Oh, we live in the Bible Belt," and and then I was like, "What? You're talking about something that hasn't existed for 40 years." That is go look. You think the Methodist Church is powerful, right? Look at how many people attend weekly church services of the Methodist Church or the Presbyterian Church or the Episcopal Church on any given Sunday, right? People are not joining character shaping institutions. The only one that's surviving is the Catholic Church, which is still managing to hold its own. And that, probably subject for another show to figure out why.
Yeah, follow-up question for the professor on that. Did he answer your question?
I don't know that I had a question. I did have a comment on your Al
Comment?
Franken thing.
Oh.
You think he should have resigned, huh?
I certainly wouldn't attribute that to Trump. I mean, if you look back when Trump was a real estate developer in New York, if he was told by a building inspector that his building didn't pass, he didn't make changes to the building. He just said, well, what are you going to do about it? And he waited until the building inspector realized it was impossible to get him to change and moved on to something else. So Trump has never been an apologist. He's never been someone who will do anything other than exactly what he wants to do. And that was, 30, 40 years ago.
Agreed. What my point was is that a certain element of society, in this case, Democrats, if you sin or err or make a mistake, you're persona non grata. You're out.
I don't think that's unique to Democrats. Republicans did that same thing. I mean, that's why I stopped being interested in running for politics 30 plus years ago.
Yeah, but you're a dinosaur too. I'm saying now the Republican Party has no shame on any of that.
Yeah.
Agree or disagree?
I think that's the essence of that's the essence of why that and social media are the essence of why we're so polarized, because everybody decided that the best thing to do was vigorous advocacy.
Yeah.
And if you weren't all the way, then you weren't good.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, we're saying similar things in different ways. I'm just not being articulate. Excellent. Any other comments, Jeff? You're good?
It's the success of the postmodernist movement, which is a rejection of the idea that human beings should strive to seek truth, and that instead what we should truth is impossible, so therefore all that matters is power. And
but Republicans used to fight against that. That's the conservative movement.
But they've given in essentially. I mean, I remember watching this happen among some of my Republican friends, and for a lot of them, it happened during the Obama administration and during the late stages, especially Obama's second term. and I just saw, there would be a news story where normally this would be a kind of slam dunk. And I mean, like when the Obama administration was telling a story about what happened in Benghazi, you would have just expected the media to say, "Hey, they lied," or and the Obama administration needs to take its lumps. But instead, they just kept making these arguments for how it could be possible that they're telling the truth. And you're like, the media is just, turning themselves into cartwheels in order to never criticize Obama, even when something is just a flat out lie. And Republican politicians were kind of losing their minds by it. And I remember, especially when there were still in 2016 anti-Trump Republicans that were, in many cases expecting Trump to lose the election. But when they saw how they handled the Russia investigation and the complete lack of interest in telling the basic truth of, or even investigating what happened when the Obama administration essentially found a workaround with the FISA court, and the Clinton administration or the Clinton campaign worked with this law firm to get around the law and sneak evidence into a FISA court. And you're like, this is the National Security Agency, or how about the IRS scandal? That was another one where it was clear that the IRS was targeting conservative groups. And David French, who we think of as being this really important, anti-Trump figure now, but he was at the time a lawyer who was winning a bunch of lawsuits against the Obama administration because they could prove over and over again that the Obama administration was using the IRS to target its political enemies. And I remember a lot of things like that were happening in the second Obama administration, where mainstream Republican politicians just thought to themselves, like, there's no point. They had friends who worked at Politico and the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they would give these stories and then watch as none of it got covered. And you just say, why won't NBC News cover this? Why won't ABC News? Why won't CBS? Why won't CNN? Why won't the New York Times? Why won't the Washington Post? And all these reporters and all these newsrooms were just killing these stories.
So, Professor, that resonates with me. I've had real life people say that Democrats and liberals are really nasty, tough, brutal campaigners, and they'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll steal to win the election, and we've got to do the same damn thing. We've got to win, or otherwise we'll never have power again. We've got to.
Yeah, I guess, but it's not so much that; it's about the capture of the institutions that led to this cynicism. The media and educational institutions, so that now nobody.
Breaking them all down?
What's that?
That's why Trump's breaking them all down?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what he's attacking, like he's attacking media and he's attacking education, and there are a lot of people who are wildly sympathetic to these things because they've been convinced that these institutions are essentially irredeemable.
I don't even know where to go with that. Okay, Eric, you've joined us before, I think, but you get another bite at the apple.
Well, I had a bite I was going to take, but I just got so down a mental rabbit hole with that last bite about the apathy that I am seeing in kids who are convinced, 18 to 24-year-olds specifically, who are convinced there's no point. There's no point in engaging in this system because everyone involved is terrible. And this is what terrifies me the most. And I think they are the most likely to be looking for labels because they've been given no other structure, so they're just making up their own. But I don't necessarily think it's the demise of these social places.
Oh, we lost her.
Yeah,
She froze.
Very
Tommy,
much
why don't
that.
you get? Oh, she's back. Keep
Oh,
going.
okay,
Oh.
keep going again.
Sorry, it's hotel internet. So did you hear my thing about the social
Yes.
institutions not being broken down? Because it's hard to send your child to a place like Boy Scouts if you don't have a driver home, because both parents are forced to go to work because our economy depends on it. That has become more important than having a guiding human at home with the child as they're being raised. So this is where my brain is. We've got to figure out how to focus on the 18 to 24-year-old.
Well, I think that's an important point, and it brings us back to something that John mentioned earlier, the apple of gold and the picture of silver, because that's taken from this document called the Fragment on Constitution and Union, which is also known as the apple of gold document. And but what Lincoln was saying was that the word fitly spoken in America was liberty to all. But to get to here's the kicker, which leads to exactly to your point, because that is the only thing that will give people hope. And the death of hope comes from this kind of cynicism. And as Lincoln put it, hope is the only thing that will give you enterprise and industry, because nobody's going to work or suffer for a mere change of masters, right? That if you're told that the world is out to get you, then there's no point in trying. You might as well sit at home on your phone and not try to go out. And if you're told that the entire world is out to get you because of how you are, and you're being told, if on one hand, if you're a minority of some kind, and you believe that the system is out to crush your minority, right? Or if you're a Trump supporter, and you're convinced that all these institutions are out to crush you as a person, then what it actually leads to is hopelessness. You say there's no point in trying, there's no point in investing in these institutions. So what you have is an attack on character shaping institutions, because you think of these things as things that are not going to shape your character and make you better. They're going to make you worse, and it reminds me of how important it was to listen to my other favorite thinker, with James Weldon Johnson, and how important it is to guard your own identity and not have it shaped by people who are hostile to you. That you have to build your own sense of character and self-worth, and guard. You will not let. Your inner life is yours, and you will guard it against all the powers of hell. And build and construct an identity for yourself, not defined by your enemies, but by yourself and by the people who actually love you and care about you and want to make you a better person. But what we see in society now is hopelessness, because and all of the attendant degradation and humiliation that comes once you have no hope.
Well, I thought your motivational side gig speaking thing was going pretty well until that end comment. Erica, did that satisfy you?
Yes, I agree 100%, and I think it doesn't. That's the what and the why, and now we need the how for how we get them back. And I think especially because we know what happens when we have very angry, hopeless, disconnected young men in a society. It doesn't.
Yeah. Well, let me, as she froze again, let me
Hopefully these
push
kinds of
another.
conversations can,
Sorry, you froze
Nope.
again, so I started to answer.
hopefully these kinds of conversations can help us get our disaffected and hopeless young men back.
But there is a book, Wilfred McClay's Land of Hope, that is the history book that I actually use in my classes, because it is at least it acknowledges all of the flaws of the founders and all the horrible things that have happened in American history, but it just has as its focus at least some understanding of why this was a land of hope, or in the I don't know if I don't know. I've never been able to track down the original quote of Reagan, so I should be careful. I don't know whether to attribute this to Reagan or not, but where he said, if you want to know if a society is good, lower the fences and say which way people run. And
Yes.
there's one thing that, for those of you who believe that the unique thing about the United States of America is how bad it is, lower the fences and see which way people run. And then take as your premise the fact that for some reason, this is a place where if you lower the fences, people run in. Something created that, which means that there is something about America, and maybe I'll get my motivational speaker, fees back up here, but there's something about America that does make people hopeful about their own lives. And that is, in fact, the unique thing in the history of the world, that there's something about America, something about the American system that does give people hope. And
So, Professor,
Yeah.
I don't want to overreact to the last 2.5 months, but do you concur that NATO and Taiwan and conversations with Russia and China and tariffs and Canada and Greenland and Panama Canal and Gulf of America, I mean, all that kind of stuff, does that tarnish our luster a little bit, or or is that
Absolutely.
okay?
Yeah,
And
but I would also say there are people within the Trump administration, at least a couple, who know that. If you listen to Marco Rubio's, and it's really worth listening to, I highly recommend this. Listen to Marco Rubio's interview that he did with Barry Weiss last week. And you can tell that Rubio, when they get to a question about what about this, and he's like, look, I'm in charge of the State Department, because there are definitely a bunch of evil yahoos running around in the Trump administration. But and yes, without, I would say, like, listen to the silences in that interview. Because it absolutely makes America weaker to not have alliances and to be an unreliable partner in the world.
okay, but some of my liberal friends say that it's multi-generational and we're maybe never recover from it.
It's going to, yeah. I mean, but all right, here, let me give you the worst case scenario, maybe if we're putting labels on stuff, the liberal thing, and then the Trump defense. And I think both of them are true at the same time. The best version of international law and alliances and diplomacy, those things were and may be almost permanently damaged in just a few months by the Trump administration, and that will make the United States weaker and more vulnerable now and in the future. And if Trump and his craziest supporters had their way, they would have destroyed. I mean, they were on a path to destroy the world, and I don't think that's even an overstatement. That the bond, there's a reason why the bond market was getting shaky, and it's because the world was becoming convinced that we were a literal madman out to destroy the economy and laws of the world was in charge of the United States, because that was the judgment of the world in the financial markets.
All right, what's the defense?
Well, and this is also true, that when you go through Europe and our allies on a case-by-case basis, they are not and have not been good allies, because they were not holding up their end of the bargain. They were becoming dependencies on us, meaning they had essentially decided that they weren't going to pay for their own defense, that they would be a military ally of the United States only on paper, but really we were the ones defending them.
So they get free higher education and free healthcare, and we pay for their military.
Yeah, essentially. And that if you go through European countries on a case-by-case basis, that is what was happening. And that our military allies were absolutely and have not been holding up their end of the bargain for about 40 years. And that is true. And that what Trump did was force the issue. And the only way to force the issue was to shake things up and say, we're not going to defend you anymore. And then that would force them to begin investing in their own defense, which will make it possible for NATO to be an actual military alliance in the future.
So he is playing 4D chess.
Well, no, he's not. Right. He's dumb. But there are still people around them who are not, morons. And
okay, let's keep moving along. Thank you for that. And thanks, Erica. Hope or I don't know. Hope, do you have something? Or Susan, if she's still with us? Oh, you're along the LA highway.
Way back. Can you hear me?
Yep,
you're good.
Okay, so way back on cancel culture is what we will call it, way back with Al Franken. I am one of those people, and I'm connecting it to the church, even though I wasn't raised in the church, two grandfathers who are ministers. The church is where we learn radical forgiveness and radical inclusion. And it's sad that we have lost the church, and there's so many reasons for that. One, of course, is the attitude of many churches, which has been anti-LGBTQ+, but many churches are not, including lots of Catholic churches and Episcopal churches. But this is a Democrat who does not believe in cancel culture. I think it's been very destructive. And then another point is that I want help with this. I'm asking you all, my niece worked very closely with Biden and has been working in Washington, D.C. for, 5 years now. And she said she was very pleasantly surprised that her apathy was actually assuaged as she met all these really passionate people working in Congress. That surprised her, and it gave her life. And so she's trying to spread that to us. However, now is a very dark time and she can't get a job. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. So you help me. How is she so passionate and pleasantly surprised? What's going on?
Well, it's both. I mean, I used to say, and many years ago when I first got involved in politics, that being involved in politics, actually knowing people, made me less cynical. I mean, when I said that for 20 or 25 years, because most of the people working in politics were good, and we're trying to do the right thing. And if I was doing this podcast in 2008 or 2007, one of the things I would be saying is, and it's kind of interesting. It was like, and that's why I tend to focus so much on this, something happened around the second term of the Obama's second term, you know, but because that's when the wheels started coming off. But I would go in and say that this politician wants to do the right thing, but what's keeping him from doing the right thing is often how he will be perceived in public. And there were several occasions where, and especially in environmental issues, I remember working on a couple of local environmental issues with local politicians. And one time we were doing something that was actually amazing for the environment. You know, I mean, one of these things that prevented tens of thousands of cars from being on the road, that was going to, you know, preserve tens of thousands of acres of land, that was going to, you know, make money for the county. And I was like, this is actually incredible. You know, we're saving the county tens of millions of dollars. We're preserving all this land. This is incredible. We should publicize this, and we should, you know, you should run on this in your next election. And that politician said, I hope nobody finds out that I did this. And I was like, what? You know, you're doing this incredible work.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, if anyone finds out that we were doing this, if this ever becomes public, I'm going to get primaried and I'll lose my next election. So you keep your mouth shut that we're doing this. And you're like, this is a conservative Republican, you know, doing all of this incredible environmental work and hoping that it never becomes public. And essentially what the difference is that you had public-minded people who were still trying to do the right thing behind closed doors because they were good people, you know, and that often allowed the system to continue to function. But the incentive structure changed sometime around, I don't know when to say it, somewhere between 2012 and 2016.
When Facebook expanded outside of college universities.
Pardon?
When Facebook expanded to adults instead of college kids.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I mean, that was actually even earlier than that. So I don't know. I mean, social scientists are trying to figure it out, you know, because here's the other thing. That's also when like literacy rates started going down. Like, what is it that's going on that all of a sudden fourth graders stop learning how to read, or kindergartners stop learning how to read? You know, why is this all at once? And it's not with the introduction of the smartphone. It's not, you know, anyway.
It's
who knows?
teaching to a test, and your funding being, you know, connected to how well your kids do on tests. In my personal teaching opinion, from being a teacher for decades.
But that happened 10 or 15 years earlier. So you know, even that doesn't coincide with it. So again, if you're social scientists are trying to figure it out, but it could be that it's a toxic stew of many things that just happen to come together at this particular time too, in which case there is no single thing that went on, but it certainly seemed to be coming to a head during those years. But now there are still many good people in government, and you're right. But and I know, you know, I know a lot of them. I have a lot of former students who work for all three of the congressmen around here, and it's kind of nice, you know, to see so many former students, you know, on staff and doing good work. And they're all good people. They're all, I would say, trying to do their best. They're good. And again, I know Vince Fong and David Valadeo and Jim Costa, who's a Democrat. Like, I have friends who work in all three offices, and former students who work in all three offices. They're all wonderful. And yes, I am not cynical about them.
Well,
but
I think we just cater to crazy too much. There's the weirdest. We all stop and look at the train wreck for a little bit. Why there's a lot of decent people still in the background. They just don't want to be out in the front waving a burning something. So ponder that one, how we stop catering to crazy. Go ahead.
You know, just gonna say, like, I noticed that I pick up my local newspaper, and it says, Vince Fong is doing stuff to go save the giant forest, and Valadeo is working to try to make sure that Medicare and Medicaid aren't cut in a stupid way. And then at the same time, I got invited to the protest against David Valadeo for Medicare and Medicaid cuts. And you're like, why are you protesting him? Because he's the local guy, I guess. But, why don't you go protest somebody who's trying to cut Medicare and Medicaid, not the guy who's not, but he just happens to be the closest Republican who you would like to defeat? Like, I don't get it. But
well, he's in a swing district, and you got to pick that up. You got to pick
exactly,
that.
right. Yeah, you got to energize the base to go after him. Yeah.
Yikes. Let's go to Bill, if you have anything, Bill.
I'm struggling to find some thread back to your opening comments, John, where you expressed some optimism. This is a pretty depressing conversation. I guess, Stephen, I'd ask you in that regard, and maybe this will lead you to actually repeat, some history that you've offered before in these sessions. But as you've made clear in your many talks, the United States has never moved in a straight line in its history. And so let me look for some optimism there. Are there any examples from, whether you go back to Wilson or otherwise, I mean, how, can we hypothesize how we will self-correct out of this disaster that we're in right now?
Yeah, I would say you're correct. Things sometimes get worse. But there are some things that have never been better. And I'd say the Supreme Court is probably one of them. That are legal institutions that keep getting tested over and over, and maybe Bart can speak to this as well. But what I find incredible is that, all credit to the Federalist Society. They managed to work incredibly hard for decades and decades and decades to create essentially an alternative to the law schools that within the law schools that made it possible to at least begin some sort of a defense of classical liberalism. And the fact that it was in place by the time that the Obama and Trump administration would begin trying to destroy classical liberalism is either lucky or providential. But the courts had been pretty terrible for a long time. I'm not a huge fan of the Supreme Court for long stretches of American history. And I would say that institution has probably never been better, but we're sort of reaping the whirlwind of changes that took place in the 1970s, largely because Congress began delegating too much authority to the executive branch. So the other reason to want hope, to have hope, and this is where it's going to get dark for a second for, I believe, at least 4 of you, is that baby boomers are eventually going to die. And that this sort of generational whiplash that started post World War II when baby boomers were born, in that you had a generation of people where just because there were so many of them, that whatever they believed became a social movement, and we'd never really had any generations in America like that before. And without some sort of incident like World War II, we're never going to have that again. So this kind of generational whiplash will end, and some of the things that are causing these distortions can go back into the hopper of regular political problems. The other thing that might give you hope is that, you know, I still haven't finished this Martin Van Buren biography, but as I'm going through this Martin Van Buren biography, I'm just reminded of how many politicians in the past were such dolts and dunderheads and completely cynical, corrupt, you know, power hungry, you know, that we tend to study the good ones and we forget how many bad ones there were in the past too, you know, and how bad a lot of the rest of society was. In a way,
Isn't this helping you, Bill? It's always been bad.
yeah, that there wasn't this time in the past that was better. And it certainly wasn't better if you were gay. You know, like there is no glorious American past, you know, that there have always been big structural problems, and there have always been things in American history that have been getting worse, and there have always been things in American history that are getting better. What I worry about is if we don't correct, it is a big deal, and we should be worried when we have so many institutions that are hostile to the idea that human beings can live with one another peacefully. And you have this combination of one group of people who are hostile to that idea, and you have other people who aren't hostile to that idea, but are ignorant of our national purpose. You know, that should make us nervous about the long term, but it's never been that great in the past either.
Yeah, we're going to work on your motivational stuff there. We can't end like that. Bill,
Yeah,
did
sorry.
that satisfy you at least for now? Thumbs up or down? Okay. Bart, almost wind us up. We might give one short bite at the apple for
I have a
other
question for Bart. Can I ask a question of Bart?
Go ahead.
Sure.
You're my liberal legal friend here. And am I too hard on the Supreme Courts of the past, and am I too glowing in my praise of the direction of the Supreme Court?
And Bart, I'm going to answer you after you answer the professor. So you're up.
Okay. All right. Hi, Erica. Say hi to Chip.
Sitting right here, Bart. He just heard you.
Hey, Chip. No, I don't think you are too hard. You know why you're not too hard on prior Supreme Courts and stuff? Because I have this fundamental, I guess, liberal democratic belief that when you're a public official, you're always subject to criticism. And some of it's legitimate, some of it's not. That just goes with the territory. If you can't take it, do something else. So no, I don't think you were too hard. I think, though, that you ought to be thinking, you know, we do have certain members of the current US Supreme Court that are a problem. And I know we've talked about this on some other, some other conversations. So no, I don't think you're too critical of prior Supreme Courts. I think in the 1960s and the 1970s, you had a situation where they were trying to make some decisions that basically were going to pull the United States forward in a very fast way. They kind of were backed into a corner because Congress and the president wouldn't do it. And I think you got a lot of decisions during that period of time that were not very well reasoned. And, you know, those decisions have been picked apart. A lot of them have been reversed. So no, I don't think you're too critical of prior courts. You know, I think what you ought to do, though, is be a little more critical of this one. Because yes, they're very good. These are very bright people, but there are a few of them where if they constituted the majority, I think we'd have a very unhappy country. You know, it is just my
Yeah.
own personal opinion.
But I think the people who are here, I'll use my label for my new favorite label for people: critical theorists, people who reason from a premise, and therefore, like I would say like Alito, but also Ketanji Brown Jackson. So I see that they sort of, in a way, I want one person, sort of like Ketanji Brown Jackson on the court, but only one of her. You know, like I think it's important to have one person who's like that, but also like only one person who's like Alito too. You know, like but if there were two Ketanji Brown Jacksons on the court, then I would be less happy. And I don't think there are two Alitos on the court either. I think that people.
Thomas and Alito, peas in a
Pardon?
pod.
Pardon?
Thomas and Alito, peas in a pod.
No, I disagree. I think there are important distinctions. Clarence Thomas is a really interesting legal thinker, and I think he's on a journey that nobody else is on. You know, I think he is.
He's just a reactionary to the movement of the last 50 years of the left trying to impose their will on a liberal court on America. And he's just reacting to that, going, let's go back to strict constructionalist.
I don't think so. I think that if you look closer at Clarence Thomas, you will see somebody who is reasoning from a premise that is different from everybody else, which is that he is scarred by the existence of Dred Scott and Plessy. And he has a theory of law that is based on how do you overturn Dred Scott and Plessy. and it leads him to some interesting places, but we've never had a justice who was more anxious to or less enthusiastic about stare decisis because of Dred Scott and so yeah. I don't know that I put him as peas in a pod with Alito. I think they're on different paths. But you're right, they do vote together a lot.
Yeah, so let me give a retort to your question and Bart's answer. I am shocked by and it's awakening. They're getting woke on a weekly basis. I see more and more people come up, Democrats and liberals, say we have to defend the court against the administration. And so it's shocking to me how Democrats and liberals are now the NATO people. Protect Ukraine, protect the court.
Liberals have discovered pluralism. Like they're defending conservatism. Yeah,
it's switched. So my whole career, all of a sudden, we've switched in the last 10 years, and I'm glad I'm not a part of either right now. You're still happy to be Republican.
Well, I'm a part of a Republican Party that doesn't exist anymore.
I know. What are you doing? Why would you belong to a group that doesn't exist?
Because I don't, again, getting back to my James Weldon Johnson quote, they don't get to define me. They're the ones who have to change, not me.
You have a PhD.
I would keep being a Lincoln Republican, whether they want me to be or not. I'm in charge of that, not them.
Okay, fair enough. All right, last call. This is a quick answer and question, or we're going to declare victory. Anyone?
Somebody, I think Erica had another. Okay. No, Erica had something.
Can we please do a call just on this topic at some point?
On the court?
Please.
It's been a year or two since we've done that, hasn't it, Professor?
Yes.
Let's do one.
And let's evaluate and compare and talk about Dred Scott and Plessy.
Okay, Bart, you'll have to weigh in a lot on that one too.
Sure, yeah. No, that's no problem.
Okay, we'll put that on. Thanks, Erica. Anything else, team? All right. Well, wait. No, Jeff wants to say one last word.
I have a question just for the professor after the recording's over. It's unrelated to this.
Oh,
actually, I have one of those too, Professor. So good. We can, if you can stay on for a second after I stop the recording. All right. Anyone else for today? Or otherwise, we're going to declare victory.
Good.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Let's see if I can get this off recording without our
Thank
producer.
you.
All
Have a
right.
good day, you all.
Thanks all.